The views and opinions expressed on the Hard Time Podcast are of the hosts and guests individually. The Hard Time Podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not affiliated with any entity, agency, or department. Human beings have thoughts and feelings that do not necessarily affect the professional performance of their duties.
Welcome to the Hard Time Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Motherfucker Welder, the profane one. I am a corrections sergeant somewhere in the American Southwest in an undisclosed top secret location. And this is Hard Time. Welcome to another episode. This week, we're going to get into New York. I'm an expatriate New Yorker, so we're going to get into some goings on of the Luigi Mangione case, some updates in that case, some things that have gone on with him and some of his supporters, we'll say, and then possibly some more escape news out of Georgia, an interesting terrifying escape that went on there. And then if we have some time, we'll get into one that Sarah, a story that's not as corrections related, but it just illustrates how much it sucks to live in New York City, and kind of gets into why I'm an expatriated New Yorker, how as you are otherwise law-abiding citizen, if you try to defend yourself in New York City, how they'll drop the hammer on you and how much it sucks to live there and now in more places in the United States. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and it's increasingly sucks to live in the United States. So hopefully they just dropped some stuff here kind of local to me in the Southwest. They're proposed some gun laws that are going to be possibly signed here soon that will probably be challenged, that are extremely restrictive for the Southwest United States. So we'll get into some of that. So we'll get into some political stuff for you. But first, we have the lunatic Luigi Mangione fan posed as FBI agent in botched bid to break accused CEO killer out of New York City jail, said the feds. So this is the New York Post. Reuben Fenton and Ben Cockman brought this to our attention. So we'll get into the details of this. Luigi Mangione, there he is, everyone's favorite lunatic, and get into some of the details here. So a pizza cutter toting lunatic posed as an FBI agent. That's right. Burt Macklin. In a bizarre botched bid to spring Luigi Mangione out of his notorious Brooklyn jail, federal prosecutors said Thursday. Minnesota native Mark Anderson, 36, approached the intake area of the Metropolitan Detention Center just before 7 p.m. Wednesday night, according to court records and law enforcement sources. Anderson, a Bronx pizzeria worker, allegedly made a head-scratching claim that he had an order signed by a judge to free the accused cold-blooded killer who is being held without bail. When asked to show his credentials, Anderson allegedly took out a Mankato, Minnesota license and said he had weapons in his bag. Staff guarding the intake area searched the bag and found a barbecue fork, and a round steel blade that resembled a pizza cutter inside, court paper said. After throwing a stack of papers at the Bureau prison staffers, Anderson promptly was arrested and charged with impersonating an FBI agent. The papers were related to lawsuits Anderson planned to file against the Justice Department, court papers say. Anderson had moved to the Big Apple for a job opportunity that fell through and had recently been working at a Bronx pizza parlor, according to a law enforcement source. What pizza eatery he worked at was not immediately clear. He was held without bail at his first court appearance. The case Thursday afternoon, meaning he'll soon be making joining Mangione at the very complex he tried to break him out of, MDC Brooklyn. Anderson appeared relaxed during the Brooklyn federal court hearing, flashing spectators the peace sign out of his way on his way into the room. His court-appointed lawyer, Mark Wheel, said to Mangione, loving maniac, was mentally ill. He argued in vain for him to be released and asked in vain for him to be released and allowed to check into a hospital. Mr. Anderson obviously needs some sort of treatment, Weil said to the court. It doesn't seem like this was a serious attempt to spring a federal inmate, the attorney said. He didn't have a badge. He didn't have an FBI-issued weapon. Magistrate Judge Taryn Murky ordered that Anderson be jailed, calling him a flight risk and citing his several arrests in the Bronx in recent months involving allegedly illegally carrying weapons. Anderson made several unhinged screeds on his public Facebook page in the months leading up to his arrest, including one post which he wrote that terror cells were monitoring his page and claimed to be assisting ICE agents in making busts. The wacky alleged episode of the jail unfolded days before Mangione, 27, was set to appear Friday in Manhattan federal court for a pretrial conference in his headline-grabbing case. The University of Pennsylvania graduate is charged with executing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in the Midtown sidewalk on December 4th, 2024, outside the healthcare giant's annual investor conference. Mangione had written in his notebook about his desire to whack Thompson in a targeted hit inspired by what he called the United Healthcare's parasitic practice of denying claims, according to prosecutors. He has pleaded not guilty. So he wants to go to trial. Mr. Mangione and Burt Macklin. Mr. Anderson. Oh, these two deserve each other, and now they're going to be housed together. So I don't think they'll necessarily be crossing paths together with Mangione being so high profile, but yeah, it is rather interesting that they ended up being housed in the same spot now. So now we do have another update with the Mangione case. I thought that was interesting. One of the Mangione faithful, one of his lunatics, trying to break him out with a pizza cutter. Thankfully, it was like a safety style pizza cutter. It doesn't look like one that could do a whole lot of damage. Thankfully, Luigi Mangione will not face the death penalty, federal judge rules. So we'll get into that and what the implications are, because he has several cases pending. So we'll talk a little bit about what's going on, the latest with Luigi Mangione in New York. Luigi Mangione will not face the death penalty for allegedly killing United Healthcare Workers CEO Brian Thompson in December 2024. A federal district court judge ruled Friday, dealing a blow to U.S. prosecutors who were adamant about pursuing the ultimate sentence. U.S. District Court Judge Margaret Garnett dismissed the murder charge in Mangione's federal indictment, which was the only count in any of the cases that brought against him that would have carried a possible death sentence. He still faces 2 counts of stalking, which carry a maximum possible sentence of life in prison without parole in the federal case. Garnett based her decision on the interpretation of the law, which requires that the killing he committed be committed during another crime of violence. Prosecutors alleged the other crime of violence were represented by 2 stalking charges, arguing Mangione stalked Thompson online and traveled across state lines to carry out the killing. The judge disagreed, finding the stalking charges did not amount to crimes of violence, and dismissed 2 counts of Mangione's federal case, the murder charge and related firearms offense. The analysis contained in the balance of this opinion may strike the average person, and indeed the lawyers and judges, as tortured and strange, and the result may seem contrary to our intuitions about the criminal law, Judge Margaret Garnett wrote in her ruling, but it represents the court's committed effort to faithfully apply the dictates of the Supreme Court to the charges in this case. The ruling was one of 2 Garnett issued Friday. She also decided to allow key evidence recovered in Mangione's backpack at the time of his arrest be presented at trial over objections by the defense. Still, the ruling on the death penalty is a boon for Mangione and his attorneys, who made several arguments to avoid a capital sentence, and is sure to galvanize the 27-year-old's many supporters who see Mangione as an avatar for their resentment and anger towards the American healthcare system. We're all very relieved, Kevin Friedman Angafilio, one of Mangione's attorneys, told reporters Friday when asked about her client's reaction to the news. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced she had directed the Justice Department to pursue the death penalty in April 2025, calling the killing a premeditated, cold-blooded assassination that shocked America. In court Friday, an assisted U.S. attorney indicated he did not yet know whether the Justice Department would appeal the judge's ruling on the death penalty. Judge Garnett asked for an update by February 27th. Garnett denied as moot the defense's other motions regarding the death penalty. She said the only motion that still may be relevant is the non-capital case is regarding the pre-trial publicity. She suggested the defense table that for now until prosecutors make the decision on appealing, and they can renew that motion with a new brief at a later time. So Mangione still faces murder charges in state court, but New York State, of course, doesn't have the death penalty. So Mangione still faces a second-degree murder count and other charges in a separate case in New York State, where the death penalty is unconstitutional. If he is convicted of the highest charges in the state case, Mangione could face a sentence of 25 years to life. Mangione's defense team has found similar success in capitalizing on legal nuances in that case. Last fall, the judge in his New York case dismissed the top 2 charges in that indictment, which there were 2 terror-related murder charges. A state judge found that there was no evidence presented of a desire to terrorize the public, inspire widespread fear, engage in a broader campaign of violence, or to conspire with organized terror groups, which was required by the statutes governing those charges. Mangione also faces counts related to his arrest in the state case in Pennsylvania that are not death penalty eligible. He has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Mangione's notebook and other backpack evidence will be allowed. So this is the thing that they were arguing about. Judge Margaret Garnett also ruled Friday to allow into Mangione's federal trial recovered from his backpack at the time of his arrest at McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, 5 days after Thompson's killing. Law enforcement seized several items from Mangione's backpack, including a handgun, a loaded magazine, and a red notebook. Key pieces of evidence the authorities have said tie him to the killing. The recovered gun is consistent with the firearm used to kill Thompson, federal authorities said in court filings. Some of the handwritten entries in the notebook express hostilities toward the healthcare insurance industry and wealthy executives in particular, they wrote. Mangione's attorneys have argued that the evidence be barred from trial. Of course they would, contending the search for their client's backpack was illegal because they had not yet obtained a warrant and there was no immediate threat to justify a warrantless search. They were searching for a murderer and he had a handgun in there. So, yeah, I would say he's a murder suspect. Federal prosecutors have argued in court filings that officials had a right to go through Mangione's possessions as part of a routine arrest procedures and search for any weapons that could be a safety threat. Prosecutors have said the evidence should have been permitted since it would have been inevitably been discovered legally during the course of the investigation. And that's the other thing. Like when you arrest somebody, you have to inventory their property. So Mangione's defense team is trying to get the same evidence thrown out of his case in New York State Court. In December, several witnesses testified during a days-long hearing over the disputed evidence. The judge said in that case is expected to issue a ruling in May. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is trying to convince the state's judge to set their trial for July. Mangione's attorney said they'll need time to prepare for the federal trial, which is scheduled to begin with jury selection on September 8th, following the opening statements on October 13th. That's the thing I don't agree with or understand about the criminal justice system. When you're talking about something like as obvious as evidence that's right there and going to slap you in the face, like when you have physical evidence that's there in their possession, or I've seen cases where they have video evidence of someone committing a crime that's obviously them. Sometimes they even use their legal Christian fucking name while committing the crime because they're that fucking stupid. And then the judges will be like, well, we can't make a determination on what we're going to do. Really? Do you have to come back in fucking May or set something for fucking July? Like, either you're going to allow it or you're not. Like, why? It's February. Like, why does it take you 2 months to determine whether or not you're going to allow something that's as obvious as fucking anybody can all get out? Like, it's right there staring you in the fucking face. Either you're going to say what everybody else is fucking thinking, that it's obvious as all get out, that they're guilty as sin, and it's fucking right there. And you're just going to say, yeah, the backpack and fucking firearm that were found in his possession are going to be evidence. Move on. Like, it's going to be allowed in the fucking trial. Like, why do we have to? You know what? We'll come back in May and we'll talk about it in May. Really? I don't fucking get it. Like, that shit drives me fucking nuts. They're like, I know you got a job to do and people's lives are in the balance and stuff, but Jesus fucking Christ, like, just man up and make a fucking, just, yeah. It's as obvious as all get out. You're guilty of sin. You did the fucking crime. You're gonna do the fucking time. Yes. I'll allow it. This is it. You know? Now, if you're waiting on results to come back, you're waiting for something to see if it's like I could see if you're waiting on ballistics to come back to see if it is in fact the item or something, that's different. But like to say if it's going to be allowed or not, I don't see why it takes that fucking long. Like, it's obvious it is or isn't. Like, just make a fucking decision. Jesus. Anyways, maybe it's just me, but I see this shit every week and they're like, let's come back in 2 weeks or let's come back in a month and fucking talk about the same shit that we couldn't fucking decide 2 weeks ago. And it's like, let's come back in 6 weeks. It's like, Jesus. So we can do this again and you can still not make up your fucking minds? How long does it take? Anyways, that's the latest on Luigi Mangione. Is he's got some crazy fucking followers that are as crazy as him. He won't be facing the death penalty, but he's still got a bunch of charges and a bunch of different, but still has the New York stuff, still has the PA stuff, still has the federal stuff, and he's not even ready to go to trial, and they're dragging shit out. So we're gonna still hear about Luigi Mangione for a while and his crazy fucking followers. So there will be more updates to come, I'm sure. But now on to Georgia. This was kind of ties into we talked about a few weeks ago an Uber escape. This was 3 jail escapees kidnapped Lyft driver and fled to Florida from Georgia. So we'll get into that, how this came to be. This is on Corrections 1. It was by originally by Associated Press by Jeff Martin. Says the inmates used a fake name to order a Lyft, dragged the driver into the back seat, held her hostage for hours as they fled from DeKalb County Jail to South Florida. So they transited the whole damn state. Like, that's from Atlanta to South Florida. That's that's a pretty decent jaunt. It's not a small road trip, at least. Atlanta. 3 inmates who escaped from a jail east of Atlanta, including a murder suspect, commandeered a terrified Lyft driver's car to reach South Florida before she was rescued and they were captured, according to details revealed in court records. The driver told FBI agents the men used a fake name to order the ride, put a rope around her neck from behind her, dragged her into the back seat, and threatened to kill her, according to court affidavit filed Tuesday, obtained by the Associated Press. The inmates were able to compromise a portion of a cell inside the DeKalb County Jail to make their escape, said DeKalb County Chief Deputy Demetris Atkins. He didn't provide more specifics because jailers didn't want other inmates to know the facility's weakness. We repaired the area that was compromised, but we're looking at other areas that are similar to them to fortify them to make sure they're not compromised in the same manner, Atkins said at a Tuesday news conference. But I'm sure word has gotten around. DeKalb County Sheriff Melody Maddox described the jail as an aging facility that's deteriorating right before our eyes. The jail is in Decatur, about 10 miles or 16 kilometers east of downtown Atlanta. The escape was discovered early Monday during a routine security check, authorities said. After jailers realized the three were gone, investigators listened to recordings of conversations they'd had on recorded phone lines. So we've gotten into listening to phone lines on recent episodes as well. They've learned that one of the inmates had contacted people on the outside who helped them evade capture after escape, the U.S. Marshal Thomas Brown said. And they don't really get into a whole lot more details. They're keeping those cards close to their vest as well. The inmates were picked up by an unnamed man and taken to one of their girlfriends' homes, Brown said. Then a Lyft ride was ordered using a fake female name. Officers tracked the car as it traveled to South Florida with the aid of license plate readers, devices that alert law enforcement to the locations of wanted vehicles. When they caught up with the car and tried to stop it, one of the inmates jumped out and ran, but was arrested along with a second inmate, according to a court affidavit. Investigators also learned that the men used the Lyft driver's credit card for a short-term rental of a home in Miramar, Florida, where officers apprehended the third inmate and rescued the driver, court records state. The driver told investigators she was held in the car for 6 to 10 hours, and they tried to gain access to her phone and online banking records. After trying to escape once, she endured increasing threats, being shot, raped, and tortured, an FBI agent wrote in an affidavit. What pieces of shit. As you can imagine, the Lyft driver is very traumatized by this, Brown said. All three inmates were charged with kidnapping as well as the escape, according to the criminal complaints. What about the fucking rape? A lawyer with the Federal Public Defender's Office in Fort Lauderdale, appointed to represent one of the men, 24-year-old men, so Leap, Stevenson Charles, did not immediately respond to messages seeking comment Tuesday evening, nor did a Miami attorney representing a second, Nayad Johannes, 25. There was no lawyer listed in court records for the third, Yusef Minor, 31. Charles was being held before the escape on charges including murder and armed robbery. The other two faced charges including robbery and arson. The sheriff's office had warned that the men might be armed and were considered dangerous after their escape. Before they were captured, federal authorities had issued particularly strong warnings advertising citizens to be wary of Charles, who had had several run-ins with law officers in Georgia and Florida. He had been sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of kidnapping and bank robbery. A federal agent wrote in Monday affidavit regarding the recent jail escape. After being sentenced, the agent wrote, Charles was turned over to DeKalb County authorities on December 5th to face the murder charge, details of which are not immediately available. In one of the multiple cases involving Charles in South Florida, he is accused of meeting a man through the Grindr online dating application, then pulling a gun on him when they met in person at a Miami residence in 2022. Charles then drove the man to various Miami area banks, withdrawing money from the victim's account, court records show. Can't really get into details, but I am familiar with a very similar case. It's second article here from CBS News, pretty similar, but it says 3 Georgia inmates who escaped DeKalb County Jail captured in Florida, officials say, by Christopher Harris. The manhunt for 3 Georgia inmates who escaped from the DeKalb County Jail is over, the community is safe again, Sheriff Melody Maddox announced Tuesday after 3 men were captured in Florida. Standing alongside local, state, and federal law enforcement leaders, Maddox said the inmates were taken into custody without incident following a coordinated multi-agency search that stretched from Metro Atlanta to Broward County in South Florida. The streets of DeKalb County are safe once again, Maddox said. That is because of the swift action of law enforcement. This will not be tolerated and will continue to fight to make sure our families, friends, and loved ones are protected. Who are the DeKalb County jail inmates who escaped? 3 inmates, Stevenson Charles, Yusuf Minor, and Naod Johannes, who escaped from DeKalb County Jail late Sunday night. The escape was discovered during a routine check when a deputy found that a portion of the jail had been compromised, according to Chief Demetrius Atkins. Charles, 24, was being held under an armed robbery charges and serving a federal life sentence. Minor, 31, faces 2 charges of armed robbery and 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Johannes, 25, is charged with simple assault, arson, and unlawful acts of violence in a penal institution. Atkins said the jail, which is more than 30 years old, is aging infrastructure that the inmates were able to exploit. He declined to provide specific details about how the escape occurred, citing security concerns, but said reports had also been made and additional safeguards are being evaluated. U.S. Marshal Service took the lead in tracking down Charles, while a regional task force focused on the other 2 inmates. Marshals said intelligence gathered from recorded jail phone calls helped investigators identify people who assisted the escape. So they may have had people possibly waiting for them. Georgia inmates took a Lyft to Miami. Authorities said the inmates were picked up outside the jail, taken to Minor's girlfriend's home by someone, and later taken by a rideshare driver to Florida. Using investigative tools, marshals tracked their movements and arrested all 3 in the Miami metropolitan area. So that license plate reader. What gets me is the Lyft driver picking them up. They said they used a female name. You'd think that the driver would have hesitated to pick them up, 3 males, with them using a female name. She would have not, wanted to pick them up if it was a female name that was used. Pick up 3 males if it's supposed to be 1 female, but this case worked because of the strong partnerships between local, state, and federal law enforcement, said U.S. Marshal Thomas Brown of the Northern District of Georgia. The rideshare driver involved is being interviewed by the FBI, and the ongoing investigation. The 3 men are now facing charges in connection with the driver alleged kidnapping. Officials said. Sheriff Maddox emphasized that while the escape was a serious breach, her office acted immediately and will continue pushing for improvements at the jail facility. We know it's going to cost money, but either we pay now or we pay later. Officials said no one was harmed during the escape, and the investigation of how it happened remains active. The 3 inmates are expected to be returned to Georgia to face the pending charges, as well as new federal charges. And just a clarification, says that she was threatened with rape, but she wasn't raped, so that's good. Still terrifying, but better than actually being penetrated by these terrible pieces of human filth. All right. And then now on to our other story. That's quite the harrowing story for a young woman to be, in that situation, just trying to do her job and then just be picked up by 3 inmates to be, taken into custody by them and them, taking her accounts, taking her phone, her car, the one, taking her, renting a house with her and stuff, and, spending time with her, like, just terrifying situation for her to be in. So I'm glad that she's safe overall, but just shows, it's always, they blame the physical plant, but I mean, you have to be able to keep up the maintenance and stuff on your prison so that it can't be exploited, your prison or jail. Because if they can, they will exploit it. And unfortunately, that young woman paid the price. So hopefully in Georgia, sounds like they've learned their lesson and now they're taking some proactive measures. So lesson learned, I guess. It's just sad that it had to come to that. So now, 67-year-old New York City man gets 4 years in prison for self-defense. That's right. You defend yourself in New York City and you go to prison, and the criminals get to go away. They don't have any kind of repercussions, right? Like, you do your job as a corrections officer and you lose vacation days, you get to go sit in front of a judge. And what do inmates get? Like, nothing. They don't have any kind of repercussions for their actions. So according to this I had to find a new source so that I could read it out. This is by Ed Foster at MSN. According to gun rights commentator Liberty Dahl in her recent video, the story starts dark May night in 2023 in Queens around 2 a.m. So try not to be active late at night, early in the morning if you can help it. 67-year-old Charles Foner was walking home near a parking garage. Liberty Dahl said he was suddenly approached by a 32-year-old Cody Gonzalez. Gonzalez allegedly lunged at Foner, demanding cash and cigarettes while holding a sharp object in his hand. She explains that it was a dark, tense, and quick. Even after Foner pulled a gun, Liberty Dahl says Gonzalez kept charging toward him. Foner fired, hitting Gonzalez 4 times in the chest. Gonzalez turned, tried to run, and then collapsed in the street. Liberty Dahl notes that Foner himself dialed 911 to report what happened. There was no attempt to flee or hide the incident. Only later, she said, that police determined the sharp object in Gonzalez's hand was actually a pen. But Liberty Dahl also points out that Gonzalez was reportedly carrying a gun as well, making the encounter even more dangerous in hindsight. A violent past versus a clean record. Liberty Dahl stresses that Gonzalez was not some random, harmless passerby. She reports that he had 15 prior arrests dating back to 2004. Those arrests, she said, included robbery and gun charges, along with a history of mental illness. Earlier that same night, Gonzalez had allegedly been smashing windows around the neighborhood. By contrast, Liberty Dahl says Foner had no criminal record. He was a 67-year-old retired doorman working at a deli and living near the courthouse. She notes that he told prosecutors his neighborhood was crime-ridden and he didn't feel safe. Looking at the attempted robbery, she argues it's hard to say he was wrong about that. In her framing, this was exactly the kind of scenarios most people picture when they talk about self-defense. Older citizen, younger, violent, repeat offender lunging in the dark with a weapon. Gun pulled, shots fired, life or death call made in seconds. So that's something that, every gun owner thinks about. It's um, you don't necessarily want to be pressed into using your firearm, but it's um, those kinds of situations where you're um, somebody with a sharp object, with a knife, with a gun, or whatever comes up to you, that you have to make a quick decision. From self-defense shooting to 25 gun charges. Liberty Doll says the good news was that Foner was not ultimately charged with murder. Authorities apparently accepted he was acting in self-defense during the robbery attempt. So that's something, at least. But in New York, she points out, the story never stops with just self-defense. The real trouble started when Foner admitted the revolver he used was not legally owned. Liberty Doll points it bluntly. Putting a legal gun in New York is just about as common as unicorn farts. There's her way of saying permitting and registration system is designed to be painful, slow, and restrictive. Police went to Foner's apartment after the shooting. According to Liberty Doll, that's where they found what they call an arsenal of 26 handguns, revolvers, and rifles, plus ammunition. Because New York requires all firearms to be registered with the state, each registered gun became a separate problem. Liberty Doll says Foner had bought most of those guns back in the 1990s and never registered them as required under current law. For that, she reports he was hit with 25 separate weapons charges. What began as a clear self-defense shooting spiraled into massive paperwork and possessions charge. To drive home how harsh the system is, Liberty Doll notes his bail was now set at $50,000. This was for a senior citizen deli worker with no criminal history who lived practically next door to the courthouse. She said the assistant district attorney openly argued they needed to make an example of him because the city has too many shootings. In her view, that line reveals a lot. The priority wasn't justice, it was sending a political message. Why a 67-year-old took the plea deal. So they have too many shootings, but they let out all the repeat offenders, but they throw the book at somebody who has no criminal record. Tell me how that makes sense. According to Liberty Doll, Foner was staring down the barrel of 25 years in prison. At his age, that would functionally be a life sentence. She spells it out. He'd be about 94 years old when he got out, assuming he even survived that long behind bars. So as the case dragged on for more than 2 years, the risk of going to trial became impossible to ignore. Ultimately, Liberty Doll reports that Foner decided to take a plea deal. He pled to one count of criminal weapons possession to avoid the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. Now 67, he's scheduled to be sentenced to 4 years in prison at a hearing on January 14th. The prosecutor even tried to have him immediately remanded into custody before sentencing. Liberty Doll said the judge at least allowed him to go home to spend Christmas with his family. It's a small mercy in a case that otherwise feels harsh and unforgiving. She also highlights comments from his attorney, Thomas Kniff, the same lawyer who defended Daniel Penny in his high-profile New York case. Kniff reportedly said if Foner had gone to trial, the illegal gun charges would have been easy for the state to prove. Only 6 of his firearms were registered properly, according to Liberty Doll's recounting of Kniff's statements. The rest weren't, which is a clear statutory violation under New York law. Kniff called Foner a hero put in an impossible situation, Liberty Doll says. He argued that in a fair constitutional state, Foner would be getting a plaque instead of a prison term. What this case says about New York's gun climate. Liberty Doll says this case is more than about just one man's tragedy. She frames it as another example of how New York punishes gun owners even if they clearly act in legitimate self-defense. She compares Foner's situation to the Dexter Taylor's case. In that case, she notes, Taylor didn't shoot anyone or use a gun in self-defense at all. He was just an engineer building things at home and still ended up in a maximum security prison on gun charges. By that measure, Liberty Doll dryly notes, Foner is getting the better end of the stick. But she clearly doesn't mean that as real praise for the system. For her perspective, the New York's message is simple. If you dare to be armed with a single high crime area without perfect compliance in every registration rule, you are the problem, even if you save your own life. That's the part that feels upside down. The violent repeat offender is dead. The would-be system survives, or would-be victim survives. Yet the state decides the real focus should be on the man who refused to be another crime statistic. It's hard not to see the chilling effect built into that outcome. How many other older New Yorkers will look to the story and decide it's safer, legally at least, to go unarmed and hope for the best? Chilling message to ordinary New Yorkers. It could be worse, she says, but it's still not far from good. A 67-year-old man will lose 4 years of his life, remaining life, for the crime of surviving a violent attack with the wrong kind of gun in the wrong jurisdiction. Her coverage carries an underlying warning. If the state is more outraged by an unregistered revolver than by a serial offender attacking a senior citizen at 2 a.m., something is badly off balance. From a broader view, it looks like this is a clash between two realities. On the street, the reality is that criminals choose the time and place, and older, weaker victims only have seconds to react. In the courtroom, the reality is that technical compliance and political optics can often matter more than context or common sense. Liberty Doll suggests New York is firmly leaning towards the second reality, even when the first one nearly cost someone their life. Cases like this send a clear signal to ordinary New Yorkers. Yes, you have the right to live, but if you defend that life with a gun the state doesn't like, you may end up paying for it in years behind bars. And that, more than anything, is why stories like Charles Foner resonate so strongly in the gun rights world. They aren't just about guns. They're about whether the law still understands the difference between a predator and a man who refused to be prey. So yeah, that's I had a person attempt to break into my home in New York. I didn't have any problems in the city, strangely enough. But in the smaller city that I lived in, we had we had similar crime statistics to like New York City, and they were moving a lot of people from the big city into the smaller area, the smaller city, and they would move people there because it was cheaper to put them on welfare in the smaller cities than from New York City. And they actually had programs where they would move people. And I wasn't able to, like, after that happened, and I, basically took care of the situation without a gun, called the police, and, was able to get the person away and deal with them with my bare hands, basically. And they weren't armed. And I decided I needed to arm myself and got a shotgun, but I decided I wanted to get like a handgun and started looking into like how difficult it was to do that. And I decided I'd like to move because it was going to take like thousands of dollars and like years and classes and like all the shit, all these hoops jump through in New York to like get a gun where criminals could buy them for a couple $100 out of somebody's trunk. Like really super easily. I was like, that's basically when I decided to move out of New York to somewhere else. And now they're passing laws in the Southwest to like basically ban semi-automatic weapons and stuff, so that and like put up like magazine restrictions and stuff like that. Just as bad or worse than the restrictions that they have in New York. So in some states in the Southwest. So if those don't go challenged by the Supreme Court, which they're unconstitutional, so they should. But if they don't challenge those things and those laws do go into place, it's like the gun laws and stuff here in the Southwest, they'll be just as bad as they were in New York. That was the reason that I left New York. So, but yeah, it's like that thing, like, they say, do you want to be, you know, judged by 12 or carried by 6? But like, who wants to go to prison for defending yourself? You know what I mean? Like, if you can find a way to try to legally defend yourself, which there are still firearms and things that you can do. If you can find a way to legally defend yourself, by all means do that. Like, if you can have a revolver, if a semi-automatic is illegal and you can use a revolver, use a revolver. You know, if you can't have a handgun, have a shotgun. If, you know, you need a rifle, then do that. Like, do whatever you can to legally defend yourself. It's just sad and ridiculous that that there's so many things that, you know, these people would try to, a state would try to strip you of your rights and stuff, and things that he had probably, you know, these 25 guns he had probably from the 90s. The majority of those things were probably legal at one time. And then he just didn't go through with registering them when they became illegal in the night, you know, throughout when the SAFE Act and different things and stuff went into place in New York City. So, in New York. So, and New York City even has some stricter gun laws on some things. So, it's just really, really fucking unfortunate. But yeah, just don't really appreciate people infringing on other people's rights. So thank you, Sarah, for bringing that up, because it's kind of timely with things that are going on. But yeah, it does kind of bother me. So I thought, and now he's going to be spending 4 years in prison for that. So it is some kind of on brand. It is he's going to be in jail. I don't know if he's going to be in with Anderson and Mangione, but we'll see. So, but that will probably do it for our episode here. I don't know if it wouldn't be an episode though if we didn't do a Jake joke. So, while we're talking about socialism and ridiculous things, did you know that Karl Marx may have lived in England at the end of his life, but he never really assimilated English hot beverage culture? He insisted that proper tea was theft. Yeah. And while we're talking about governments and things like that, there was a Roman emperor who never aged after he turned 19. His name was Constantine. All right. That'll do it for this week's episode. Thank you again for joining me. And Hard Time will return. So from me and myself and I will say good night, Jake.